All right, thanks very much, Keith. So I'd like to call the Sustainability Subcommittee of the Neary Building Committee meeting to order. Today is November 6th. It's 11:10 a.m. And our order of business is to review the HVAC situations, and I'm going to turn the meeting over to Arrow Street to take us through however you'd like to take us through.
Great. Katie, do you want me to?
Yeah, go ahead.
So we have two agenda items today. The first thing, we have Eileen Barrett and Olivia Kubaska from National Grid, who are the utility incentive sponsor through Mass Save for this project. So we wanted to have them talk a little bit about the incentive programs. We talked about them a little bit in June, but we just wanted to go through that with you because in this phase of schematic design that we're starting, one of the pieces there is to sign an MOU and select which pathway you're going to pursue. There are always alternatives to be able to switch to a different path later, but we want to make sure that you understand the pathways for path 1 and 2 that are applicable, and so that we can get that MOU started at the beginning of this phase. So Eileen and Olivia, if you don't mind turning on your cameras, that would be great, because I know we saw you over on Teams. And so I'm going to sort of hand it over to them to talk a little bit about the incentive programs and answer any questions that you might have. And then I can also share some of those initial incentive tables that we had put together to show you kind of for this project based on the size and the scope, what the incentive potential might be.
Yeah, so I'm Eileen Barrett. I'm the program manager from National Grid. So any program related questions, you can reach out to me. The way we format it is we have Leidos, who are they act as the project managers on behalf of National Grid. So for this project, you guys have Olivia, and I believe she has the presentation to kind of walk you through what it would look like.
And I'll just say the second agenda item, because I said there were two, but didn't say what it was, is to talk more specifically about what the mechanical system options that we're going to study through schematic design. So that'll be after, and then National Grid can hop on for that portion.
It's okay if I share my screen, right?
Yes, I just gave you permission to, so you should be all set, Olivia.
Thank you. Okay. Can everybody see? It's a green slide. Awesome.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So yeah, I just put together a few slides we can walk through some of our new program requirements, and it sounds like path 1 or path 2 are the two pathways of interest, but I can cover them all just so everybody has an idea of what we offer. So for this project, new construction, and I'll get into this a little bit more, but any new construction projects now need to be all electric. These are just our new program requirements. So National Grid is the electric utility in this area. So you'll just be dealing with me and Eileen and the National Grid team. So makes it a little bit easier, which is good. So quick update on our program. I don't know if anybody has been involved in projects with Mass Save before, but the new construction major renovation program has just adopted some new program requirements and these are kind of coming from the state to reach future climate goals. So our program is now fully electric for any new buildings or additions. There are some exceptions. Probably the only one a school would qualify for is if it's an emergency shelter, then it would be allowed to have gas-fired emergency generation. Or if the school is not an emergency shelter and wants to use a fossil fuel for emergency generation, that would have to be propane or diesel. But yeah, just kind of blanket for new construction. We're going for all electric buildings here. Major renovation, I don't think this is a brand new building. from what I've heard. So this won't apply, but just so everybody is aware, the restrictions are a little bit more lenient for major renovations. If there is an existing natural gas connection, that building can have it. We just can't incentivize it. So going into, and I'll just kind of skip this one. So the program has 3 participation pathways. Path 1 and Path 2 will be what I'll focus on. So those are our low EUI, which is energy use intensity pathways. So that's kind of like measuring your miles per gallon for your building is kind of a good way to look at it. So these are kind of like our premier pathways. And then we have Path 3, which is kind of catch-all measure by measure pathway, which this project likely won't be interested in. And feel free to stop me if there are any questions. So structure of Path 1, this is for any projects 10,000 square feet or greater that are looking to set a low EUI target kind of at the beginning of design. So with this participation pathway, actually with all of our pathways, MassSave brings in vendors to help the project throughout its design, and these people are the ones that are reviewing the project and helping to determine like site EUI and determine it's on track to receive its incentives. So there is a cost associated with those vendor services. For Path 1, National Grid will cover 50% of the TA vendor's cost, up to $10,000. But then we're able to just deduct any customer cost share from the incentive at the end. So we're able to do it in a way where there's no upfront cost to the customer. So it makes it a bit easier. And then Path 1 and Path 2 also offer a verification incentive. I'll get into this a little bit more, but Path 1 has the like kind of hallmark of Path 1 is that we offer a post-occupancy incentive. So we'll actually monitor the building after it's complete to make sure it's on target. So we offer a bit of an incentive to set up a commissioning team to kind of do that work to make sure that the utility has everything we need and the project's on track once it's complete.
I just wanted to hop in here to just kind of talk about or just sort of explain what the design assistance, technical assistance looks like. Essentially, it's sort of like a peer review of the work that the design team is doing. So the energy modeling and the design team is doing, the vendor provided through the incentive program was essentially doing a peer review at the end of construction documents throughout DD and then in CDs. To just make sure the process sort of has that a little bit of like QA and that it's on track for the incentive path.
Yeah, thank you. So this is looking at kind of our Path 1 tier incentive structure. So K through 12 schools, if it's a high school, it can have a target EUI that's a little bit higher, but for elementary schools, we're asking for in a site EUI of 25 or less. So that's going to put you in this $2 per square foot incentive bucket. I have a better slide here. So Path 1, kind of the incentive structure is once the project or the design is complete, that's kind of when our vendor confirms that the project is on target for its EUI. And that's when the utilities typically issue our offer letters kind of outlining what incentives the project can expect. So the incentives aren't actually paid until the project is complete. So you're going to get your first round of incentives for Path 1 once construction is complete. So you'll get this $2 per square foot construction incentive in addition to the heat pump adder incentive. So I understand that you're looking at ground source currently, or a mix or whatever. But if it's, oh, go ahead, Kate. I saw you.
I was just gonna say that
Yeah.
that's what we'll be kind of finalizing through SD of what the final
Wonderful.
system is.
Perfect. Yeah, so you'll get a $1 per ton incentive off of those heat pumps. So that's kind of where these projects get most of their incentives from, especially if ground source is selected. So that's going to be off of the it's a per heating ton incentive. So it's going to be based off of the heating capacity of that heat pump system. So this all comes at the end of construction, and then the kind of like add-on of path 1 is that you receive a post-occupancy incentive. So yeah, once the building's complete, all systems are kind of operating as they're intended to, we would start the post-occupancy period and monitor the building for 1 year. And should the project hit the site EUI, you would get an additional $1.50 per square foot. Any questions on that?
I do. So I guess I have a question around, I'm going to call it incentive strategy. Now I can't do math anymore in my head to figure out, all right, well, what actual dollars could we end up with here? But so we're going to be making a decision on, an approach, an HVAC approach. Whatever decision that is, it's going to cost a certain amount. And there's probably another approach that's going to cost a different amount. Do you normally find that anybody is using the incentives to drive their decision, or are the incentives not really overall kind of significant enough in the overall cost of the HVAC implementation, so that it's really you kind of pick your approach and then you find out whatever incentives are available that you can access? I stumbled around a little bit. Does that question make sense?
Yeah, I think it's a mix of both. I mean, Olivia is the project manager, but from like the calls I've been on, I think sometimes customers do come to us and they already kind of have an idea of what they want, and seeing these incentives might not change it for them. But I think for customers that are coming in and they might be between two different heat pumps, I think this can make a big difference for them, because when you see the ground source with the 4,500 ton, I do think that can make a difference. But we definitely see a lot of customers that come in and they already have their plan and this doesn't change it. But I think that's kind of why we have this, is to show you kind of what, it can be.
Okay.
And Roger, we also have to think, obviously, the ground source heat pump upfront cost is going to be substantial compared to the VRF or the air source. So we also have to figure in the long-term usage and energy bills that will be saving from going from one system to another. And then also outside of Mass Save, there's also probably some opportunities for some federal incentives, tax incentives. Is that right, Kate? Outside of with the ground source that we could probably also tap into?
Yes. And so after Olivia kind of finishes going through path 2, I can share some project specific potentials for the state and federal. And then we also through SD, as we look at this full life cycle cost, looking at the utility costs, the operation and maintenance costs of different systems, we'll be able to show you where those numbers play out with and without incentives. And we can also factor in whether there's PV or not PV, which is another savings stream in operation. So we'll kind of like show you different levels, being able to look at it with and without.
And we're at least
incentives.
like 200 tons for that size building.
Yes. Sorry, I don't have the tons written down on the sheet, but I can double check it. I think it was
We're
might be a little bit. I think it might have been a little less. But we have a predicted tons that we use to calculate the potential for the incentives.
Right. So right there alone, just on the ground source would be, 850,000.
Yeah, I don't, let's go through finish going through this and then we can get to the
They're
numbers.
just
I know
putting rough
everyone's
figures
excited
for Rod,
see
for
that. Yeah.
Roger to understand like what these add up to. You know, we're not talking 50 tons, we're probably talking the size building 200-ton system, so.
Is the square foot a gross square foot?
Yes, it's conditioned.
Yeah.
Gross.
So for this particular project, it's essentially going to be the gross square foot. We don't have, a garage or a lot of unconditioned.
Right, it's any
space.
area in the building that's heated or air conditioned. Is that correct?
Correct.
Yeah.
So if we had 100,000 square foot building times 2 would be 200,000 on that tier 1 incentive. Okay.
Yeah. Speaking of, actually, I don't know if I know the square footage of the building.
Yeah, so it's roughly 100,000, a
Okay.
little bit less
Perfect.
than that.
Awesome. Okay. I will move on to
Thank you.
path 2 quickly. Which also follows a EUI kind of goal, but you don't have the post occupancy period for this, or post occupancy incentive for this pathway. So in this one, we're looking at buildings that are 50,000 square feet and above. A lot of like commercial buildings and like labs and stuff kind of end up going path 2. It's mainly for buildings that kind of can't set that super low EUI. Like maybe they have something that's some process that's going to drive their EUI up, but it can also be a good option for schools. So there's also going to be a massive vendor for this this pathway, where National Grid will cover 75% of that vendor's fee, and then 25% would be for the customer to pay. Again, that can be deducted from the incentive at the end. We also offer the verification incentive for this pathway. And yeah, like I said, we're not looking at the post occupancy performance for this one. So this is just based off of your designs, not the actual performance of the building. So we can see the heat pump adder incentives are going to be the same for this pathway. They're the same across all 3 pathways, which makes it nice and easy. And then, so path 2 is going to be based off of a percent EUI reduction from the mass save baseline. So a project like this would probably easily hit tier 1 of the EUI reduction. So you're looking at a reduction of 25% or above, which would give the project $1.25 per square foot. So it would be square foot incentive and then the heat pump adder incentive for this pathway. I think that's all I had on that one. Any questions on path 2? It's a little more straightforward. I guess that's it. Path 3 is based off of KWH savings for the utility. So my guess is the team is not going to be very interested in that one, but it's kind of like our catch-all. We'll look at each energy conservation measure at the end of design or during design as well. And that then would relate to savings for the utility, which then gives you your incentive. But I think for the purposes of this project, path 1 or path 2 would kind of be where you get the most incentive. Any questions?
Good.
Okay. I can stop sharing at this point.
So the main pieces are the path 1 is $3.50 a square foot, and path 2 is $1.25 a square foot, and then they both have similar adders for the heat pumps on top of that. So the main difference is that cost per square or incentive per square foot potential between the two. So I'm going to just share my screen. Do I have sharing?
Should be all set, Kate.
You guys can see that?
Not yet.
Maybe not yet.
There you go.
It's a green box.
There you go.
So we had put these together after the pricing that came in the summer. So these are updated to what the building area was at that time. And so this is showing path 1, which would be the ground source heat pump system. In our experience, that's the system that would be required to get to that 25 EUI. We're an air source system. There's a potential to have a combination system, but an all air source system, in our experience, hasn't been able to get to that 25 EUI. So this is showing a 225 ton system for the heating capacity for the building. And so that's where the majority of the incentive comes from. There's, 200,000 and another 100,000 for that total of 350 per square foot. So that's, about 300 of the total, but the majority of it comes from the adder for the ground source heat pumps. And then this is for the path 2 EUI. So that would be an air source heat pump or air source heat pump / VRF system that are, essentially both air source. And so you can see the incentive is lower because, again, the heating capacity we've assumed is the same, but obviously it's $800 or $1,200 per ton, and sort of how that is split between the two. That 225 tons is split between the two. And so this is the path 2 incentive, which obviously the ground source system could also fall under path 2, but our experiences with the ground source system and a new code that you're going to get to that EUI of 25 easily. And so you will be able to go to path 1 for that, where the air source systems will not get to that 25 EUI and will end up in path 2. One other thing I wanted to point out just on path 1 is that there are some requirements for having some summer school or summertime use of the building. And so that is a component. And Eileen, Olivia, unless that's being taken away, I think that is still one requirement of the path 1 as well, that we do need to assume energy use.
Yeah, I'm not aware of any changes on that.
Okay. It's fairly minimal. It's 4 weeks in the summer. And so we have to assume that in our modeling. Any questions about either path and the potential?
Well, one question I had is, I know from prior conversations and just the whole idea of having a dual fueled system, not for, operations, but, well, unless there are extreme weather conditions, relying solely on heat pumps and then having a stretch of weather where it's 5-10 below, just putting that heavy tax on the equipment, and knowing that a dual fueled system might give us, just a little more peace of mind. And obviously the emergency shelter situation, that's a great question. Emergency shelter right now is at Trottier, and it does have a diesel fired generator for that. So, I would imagine we are just going to have some type of emergency generation, or generator on site. But the dual fuel is just kind of an interesting piece. If we were to decide that pathway at all, would that exclude any of the incentives that we talked about today?
Yes, so both path 1 and path 2, as Olivia mentioned, are for all electric systems.
Yeah.
The emergency generator can be fossil fuel, so it could be diesel or propane. And then if it was an emergency shelter, then you could have natural gas for that emergency generation. But in terms of the main, not the generator, but the actual systems, they have to be all electric for path 1 and 2.
I see. So
Regardless of what the system
the only
is.
way that a fossil fuel sourced equipment could be included is only if it were an emergency shelter. Is that correct?
Yeah, in order to have a natural gas connection, it would have to be an emergency.
Right. But that is still, Olivia, that's still just for the emergency generation. It's not for heating the building in that
Yes,
emergency.
no backup
So,
either. It has to
if
be
that
like
makes sense.
pure emergency.
I see.
Right. So I think there's like some exceptions for like running their emergency generator and potentially cooking, I believe, on natural gas during that emergency.
Mhm.
But, it's not saying, oh, you can have a gas boiler to heat the building if it's also potentially used as, like, that's not what that is saying.
Okay, thank you.
It's
So
just that
typically in
also,
terms of like the systems, whether it's so on a ground source system side, sometimes we will provide an electric boiler, which is really sort of a emergency backup component to it. So that's one thing that we've done with the ground source systems. And on the air source system side, sometimes we do put some electric radiant heating just to have redundancy on that side as well.
So just to clarify, I think I'm probably repeating this. Does an emergency generator eliminate incentives because we have it, or we have?
No,
to
you can have it.
circumstances?
You can have an emergency generator, and it can be powered by propane or diesel. Or if the building is also an emergency shelter, then it could also be powered by natural gas. You kind of have three
Okay,
options to
I see.
supply it.
Propane or diesel unless it's a shelter.
yeah, you could do all three options though, Roger, if it's considered a shelter in place. The
Right.
generator is just for power, so it's not a source of heating.
Understood.
So you have your shelter in place, but what Kate is saying, the other two systems, you don't have the infrastructure to put a backup boiler, whether it's electric or gas, which you can't use because of the infrastructure that the VRF is refrigeration piping and the air source is directly air-cooled equipment through ductwork. So there's no infrastructure to provide any backup unless you were to do means of electric, because you don't have that piping infrastructure in place.
All right, got it. Thanks.
Yep.
And then Olivia and Eileen, can you just explain sort of what the MOU process looks like, and, say we're, continuing the basic design being ground source, and therefore we think we can do path one. What does that look like if we're going through path one in schematic design and then something, changes later?
Yeah, so kind of the process is we have memorandums of understanding, which we would get a signature from the customer and the architect, and that enrolls the project in, say, path one. So once we have an MOU signed, I will coordinate with National Grid's tech rep, and we'll get a vendor assigned to the project. That vendor will host a charrette with the project design team and kind of run through the current scope of work, so that they can kind of put a proposal together for National Grid. We'll get that signed. We'll agree to the customer cost share. And then from there, that vendor will just kind of be reviewing the project as it moves through its design. Should something kind of happen and the project is not going to be on target to hit the EUI, and we kind of figure that out early, there's no way to kind of save it. The project would be able to drop down to path two. We might need to figure out some things with the vendor at that point, but we can have that discussion. It doesn't sound like that's going to happen, but yeah, so kind of the next step is MOU signature, and then we can coordinate with the vendor to get a meeting scheduled for the charrette. Any questions on that?
Maybe. One thing I've been kind of thinking of is where solar could be introduced. I know it's obviously a separate, completely separate project, but if we are, electric dependent, pretty much completely, and I know ground source is where we would be taking the majority. Is there the potential, would a solar project on the roof, let's say, have an impact on this one way or the other?
So that any solar would kind of be separate from what we're looking at in terms of the EUI and everything. Yeah, the path one is net zero or net zero ready. So we definitely encourage that, but yeah, it wouldn't really impact the incentives or the process or anything like that as far as we're concerned.
Yeah, where it comes into play and so where it comes into play is on the federal side in terms of incentives. So right now I don't have that factored in here because I'm just kind of showing like what the impact of just the system was. But if you had solar and if you were owning that, you could have full control of the direct pay of that incentive. And that is, roughly it's a 30% rate, but I assumed tax exempt bonds. So it would drop down to about 25% or 25.5% rate. So that's where incentives on solar come in at the federal level. They also obviously reduced your utility costs. And so if you looked at the full life cycle assessment, you would see savings after incentives as well through operation from the solar. But in terms of a first cost incentive piece, it comes in at the federal level.
I just didn't want to go ahead thinking it was completely separate and then have it have some type of impact on what would or would not be available. So that's why I bring it up.
Yeah, not for Mass Save.
Okay.
We can run over these charts because I think when we showed them in beginning of June, I think was the last time we met, they were slightly different, and it really was just because the square footage kind of came into play, as well as the updated estimate, which came in August, is reflected in here. And we also reflected the tonnage that was in the PSR narrative, some GGD. So the numbers are a little bit different. And so this is just showing the path one incentive that we just looked at. It's showing a little bit of potential incentives for EV charging. And then it's showing the investment tax credit incentive for ground source heat pumps, which is quite significant. It does cover the well fields as well as the majority of the HVAC system that it's because the majority of the HVAC system is supplied through that ground source. So it covers more than just the wells in the ground. And so this is just based on the estimated construction cost at the end of PSR, the potential incentive, and then the construction costs after incentive. And then I'll just flip to the one that's looking at the air source system with the path 2 Mass Save number. And air source systems are not eligible for any federal incentives. So that's why you can see it's 0, but I did include the cost of what that system is, just so you can see what it is, but there's no incentive on that. And so the construction cost after incentive is really just being reduced by the Mass Save number. And you can see that 8.2 is the cost of that system with the incentives. I'm gonna just split screen this for you so you can see them. Sideways.
We haven't calculated that bottom line number of 7.3 and 8.2. The other calculation off of that would be the state building incentive.
Yeah, so we're just looking at the way that the program works is that you get all of the incentive directly. MSBA doesn't share any of that incentive with you. And so I'm just taking the total cost and taking that off. Obviously, a percentage of the system is also going to be funded through the MSBA program. And so that would be additional money off. Obviously, it's not incentive, but it's it would lower the overall cost, obviously, because they're going to pay, whatever the effective rate ends up being, 30% or something like that.
Okay.
Kate, is it mandatory to put the EV charger in now, or is that just local? Like, I know I do a lot of projects in Cambridge where,
It just has to be ready. So you have to have infrastructure. That's part of the energy code.
Yeah.
But you don't have to put the final chargers in. And I just kind of have it on there so people can see there's other incentives out there, but it's, it's only $50,000 and you would only get it if you end up putting the chargers in.
you can charge the staff to juice their cars too. Off your solar panels.
I'm curious, anybody, what's a wild estimate of what a charger costs to put in? I guess including just,
It depends, like if
We use 20,000. That's where this 200,000 number comes. That includes like the wiring and the infrastructure and the charger.
Yep.
But part of construction, Roger, they're probably, like Kate said, they have to make it ready, so they're gonna have the required panels, and they might have to run the conduit out to a spot and
Right.
bury it down underneath and have it ready to be mounted, and sometimes they require some form work to mount the chargers and whatnot, but
Kate, is that a single charger or is it one of the dual chargers?
I assumed 10 chargers, so like 5 dual chargers.
Okay.
I would say the infrastructure to make the EV ready is more like $2,500. I mean, it is significantly less than installing the chargers. Because you don't have to run it. It doesn't have to be like run to exactly what you're just going to plug and play. Like it doesn't have to be that extensive of infrastructure, but all the backbone, as you mentioned, in the panel and conduit out to get outside the building.
Couldn't that run off the outside lighting?
no, I think it has to be a separate circuit.
It has to be
separate circuit.
metered separately.
Okay.
Yeah, there are some requirements that really align with things we're already doing for the energy code and LEED in terms of getting the verification incentives and the path 1 incentive in terms of how you meter the different levels. But that's pretty typical as to what we would already be doing.
And so it wouldn't just be a separate circuit, it would need to be a separate meter, Kate. Did I hear that correctly?
Yes, you have to be able to meter that load.
I didn't know that. Huh, interesting.
So if there's no other questions on incentives, I'm just gonna feel free to jump off, Eileen and Olivia as well. And then I'm just gonna kind of give a recap of where we are and what we're gonna do in SD.
and thanks very much for this incentive discussion. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for having us, and thanks, Olivia. Did a great job.
Yeah, of course.
Thank you.
Have a good rest of your day.
Thank you.
So we're in SD, this green box at the bottom. And in terms of this phase, we're going to be updating our lead checklist because lead is what was selected. We'll obviously be working on the design, and the big piece of schematic design that we'll be doing is the estimating and cost for 3 systems and doing the life cycle cost assessment, which when you get that report, it will actually say economic engineering assessment on it, but that's the LCCA. And so that's what we wanted to talk about today, of confirming which 3 system options you want to study in that LCA, because that'll be the first thing that we start doing in SD, to be able to kind of come back with those results and so you can see them and then start to work towards the final decision of the system that will be in the SD documents. So I'm going to go back to, this is again from our June meeting. These are the systems that we talked about. We talked about a ground source system, a potential alternative on the ground source system, which when we talked in June, I don't think there was any interest in that system, which is perfectly fine. We just kind of put it on here as an option because we do have another school that is doing that right now. A VRF system, which would be some air source and some VRF. And then option 4, which is an electric system. And it's a, traditional or more traditional chiller heating plant, but it's all electric. So what we're looking for today is feedback on confirming, yes, these are the 3 systems we want to look at. And also we want to confirm which system is the basis of design, because then we will compare the other systems to that system.
Hey, option 2 was no cooling though, right? Was
Yes, option
we
2,
waived
some
that
of the
out because
pieces
of the-
where it doesn't have full cooling. And we typically haven't done option 2, but we do have one school that's doing that right now. And so that's why we just put it on here as a potential option.
Yeah, I think we crossed that one out right from the get-go because of the cooling requirements.
Yeah, so we currently are option 1, option 3, and option 4. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
And on option 4, is that, I think I asked this before, I can't remember the answer. Is that like a heat pump? Is it a heat shift chiller, heat pump chiller, air source chiller, or are you gonna pair it with an electric boiler?
So there would be a pairing with an electric boiler in that.
But the main load would be done by the heat rejection from the chiller, right?
Yes.
For the heat side, okay.
Is there any?
1 through 8, 4, I think, we stick to what our original selections were.
Yeah, I was gonna ask if Chris, you and Mark had any reason to wanna not stay with at least those original selections?
No, I think we're from an incentive and stretch code, and I don't think we have many options. Correct me if I'm wrong, Arrow Street, but traditionally I would probably recommend a cooling tower, chiller, fan coil, gas boilers, but I think that's all off the table.
Yes, I mean, there's a potential to have some supplemental heating with a gas boiler, and you would still be able to meet the stretch energy code.
Mhm.
It would be more difficult to meet the specialized code, which we've already targeted for this project to get that additional 2%.
Right, so I
Sorry,
think
3% reimbursement from MSBA, and then obviously we won't get any of the mass save incentives.
right, Key, so like back to your comment on having that redundancy. I think, either option 4 or option 1 will allow you to always, option 1, if we do put an electric backup boiler, if we weren't comfortable and you wanted an additional source down the road. I mean, obviously it has to be post-construction, post-fair, like commission and verification, everything. There's nothing that says you probably couldn't add, additional heat source to the loop. Correct me if I'm wrong, right? I mean, you're gonna have the tap-ins to supply electric boiler if things change and gas becomes a thing again and electric gets out of control. There might be ways to supplement with gas down the road. Because the infrastructure will be in place where.
Yes, I mean, there won't be a service, like there won't be a gas service to the building. So
If you did the generator on gas, you'd have a gas service coming to the building.
I thought the generator was stuck with either propane or oil. Am I wrong?
Correct.
yes, unless it's an emergency shelter.
Which I think you're gonna consider the auditorium or cafeteria shelter in place, right? To remove that from Trottier because you have more space.
It might need more space, because Trottier is pretty significant when it comes to the emergency management. I think it's a great question. I'm not sure where it's gonna land.
Yeah, I think we'd want to look at that pretty carefully to understand if it really wants to be an official emergency shelter. There's other criteria that kick in. And I know typically that adds a lot of cost to the building.
Right.
You could consider it a resiliency hub, which is how we're dealing with it down in Quincy. But in that instance, I'm not sure that that allows you to say, well, therefore we need a natural gas generator.
So,
I will say in Quincy, because it is an official resilience hub, it's part of their resilience plan. And it was put out as a shelter in that sense to the town or the city to be able to come there. It did qualify. I can't remember if we actually were using natural gas, but we could, use natural gas for the emergency generator at that building.
I hadn't realized that, Kate, because the emergency shelter part, usually you get into structural requirements that are adding to the rigidity of the building.
so
Yeah, the real trigger for the Mass Save Partners was to have a documented plan by the municipality showing that this is essentially marketed and being used as that resilience shelter or resilience hub, whatever they're calling it. They needed to, it can't just be like, oh yeah, we could use it if we need to. Like it had to be essentially planned and distributed to the town that way, that is, definitely happening, that this is one of their locations where people will go.
so
Is,
unless,
is Trotter big enough now?
What my understanding is that it is, Mark. I haven't touched that in many years since it was established, probably I'd say 15 years ago, officially.
did you say Troutier?
Yeah.
Let me throw out two other suggestions, and that may take it off the table. If we need additional capacity, why don't we look at Finn? Then it gets it on the south side of town.
Talking
If-
about emergency shelter capacity, Mark?
Yeah, if we're looking at emergency, we really should consider it Finn. Then it does get it to another side of town where people could utilize it.
So I actually think that does make some sense. So if we're basically saying, all right, we're not going to qualify for an emergency shelter at the Neary, then we're going to be looking at propane or oil. Do I assume, and maybe I'm wrong, that if we look at propane or oil for a backup generator, it's propane, or am I wrong?
Well, not
So-
necessarily.
Yeah,
Diesel's fine.
typically we see
Diesel's
diesel.
Diesel.
Yeah.
Okay, you see, yeah, well, I've got an emergency generator in my office and it's diesel. Okay, all right, I get it.
Yeah.
And that's what we have now, Roger.
Okay, fine,
Self-contained generator with a belly tank underneath.
right.
So Keith, is Trotter currently the emergency shelter?
It is.
Or, okay. And are you in the process of evaluating the capacity of it? Is there a need for more, or
I don't
it
believe
is
so.
what it is?
Yeah, I think it is. It served well. I have not been asked to do any work on that in many, many years. I think it's serving the needs, and there hasn't been a need to revisit that. So I would assuming we're all set. Trotter is a pretty big place. It's 130,000 square feet. So it does, serve, the town pretty decently.
Yeah, my only reason for taking it to the other side of town, if we have a blizzard of 78,
That's right.
it's of no use to me who lives on the other side of Route 9.
9 and yep,
I got no way to get there,
right.
but I could walk to Finn.
Right.
Global
It is
warming,
Or
the
80 degrees
town-
outside.
Yeah.
The town is bisected by Route 9, and it does impact things in a variety of different ways. So Mark, that's a good point.
I agree with you, Mark. So are we, at this point, because I guess our next step is this moves to the full, building committee, right? Are we, do we know now what we're gonna move to the full building committee here, folks? Is that,
I think, yeah, we just have to finalize those selections so Arrow Street can run a model on each one of them, correct?
Right. So what
So we-
I'm hearing is that the three options we'll be studying are the ground source system, the air source / BRF system, and the air to water heat pump chiller heating plant. And that the basis of design for now, just for the purposes of the assessment, is going to be the ground source heat pump system. So I think, we're looking for, final confirmation through the NBC that, that is the direction. And then we'll start working with the design team to do the life cycle assessment.
When would you need that? The main committee to approve it?
So Katie, I'm trying
The
to remember
next-
the schedule.
Yeah, the next NBC meeting is on the 21st now. We had it on the calendar for the 18th, but Jason just sent the invite out this morning and it's the 21st.
I saw that. Yeah, he just moved that.
My reason for asking is I'm wondering if it should go to the finance committee first.
So one thing I was just going to recap, Kate, and correct me if I'm wrong, but this is just for the purposes of the study that we're understanding, these are the three, which one is your preferred? You are not locking
The
in.
preference really doesn't serve as
It's just as a
preference
baseline.
in this. It's just so we know like which one is the base that we're then comparing the others to.
Right.
It could be any one of these. Sometimes we pick the lowest cost option
So
and make that the one that we're comparing to. And then after we come back with the study, which we are targeting the week of December 16th. Sorry, am I doing that right? Yes, the week of December 16th, we'd be looking for a subcommittee. That would be our next subcommittee meeting where we review the results of the life cycle cost assessment. And then from there, we'd be looking for you to decide what your basis of design is from the three options. And then that would go back to NBC again for final confirmation
right,
that's going into the SD design.
I've got I'm on the finance committee and I'll just report back to them that we'll have a chance at a future date to review the numbers. They're going to want to see them.
Yeah, we would expect that that's what that happens, that there'll be a subcommittee. It could be a joint subcommittee, however you decide to do that, where we get into the LCCA, we'll get into the rest of the cost, review the incentives again. And then sort of after that, that's where we're looking for the decision on the direction of the system for the building.
And just to let you know, and I'll just bring it up, Roger, you're not the only one who has trouble setting up meetings. We're on our third scheduled finance meeting because
Yeah, but I like to think that I'm the leader in that area, Mark. Okay.
I'm a Luddite, so
And I think Katie will probably support me on this, okay, as well. So you gentlemen will too, okay? So
I was just going to say, it's good to be good at something, Roger. I mean, take pride, right?
we were 20
this is it.
we were 20 minutes to a meeting and all of a sudden, oh, we forgot to post it at the town clerk's office. So
that did happen once to me, and Mariana just forgot, and it was just one of those things, and I should have caught it. So I felt bad that I didn't catch it, but anyway. Okay, so do we have any other business for the meeting today? I don't think we have a public comment, but there's no one in the audience anyway.
when do we look at solar in this process?
There's Keith. Or maybe it's not Keith, maybe it's Arrow Street.
So in terms of solar, what we would typically do in SD is give you a sense of the potential generation on the building as the design form starts to take more shape. And we can also provide you an estimate in the estimate that we'll do in SD. I'm not sure if it is something where you're looking for ownership or if you're looking for a power purchase agreement. I don't know if you have other arrays in town and if you've gone one way versus the other.
I think that Keith will confirm this. I think we moved down the road of a power purchasing agreement, right? That's the structure that we're using for.
Yeah, that's the structure that we have for 2 solar arrays at Algonquin and 2 solar arrays in Northborough, both for the Proctor School and Lincoln Street School. And then if the Trottier roof gets replaced, it would likely become an option for a PPA as well.
Okay, so if you're going towards a PPA, in that case, you'd be working with a vendor that you've been working with before, or potentially doing an RFP. So typically we wouldn't really get too involved. We're obviously going to make the building PV ready. And if we go into later design phases and you have that provider on board and they can start generating engineering drawings, we can make sure we're tailoring and working to their, to their design.
Wouldn't it be preferred if we're putting a roof on to know that we're coming in and doing that at the same time, so all the structural components are in place?
Well, the building will be PV ready, so it will be absolutely able to have PV put on it, whether it's right away or 5 years down the line. And just in terms of like, are we documenting and designing the PV system like it's an ownership model? That is very different than if it's going to be a PPA where they're going to come in and put it on afterwards.
Mark, it's pretty common to see it done after. A couple projects I've been involved with, the PV ready is where the electrician runs the conduits all the way up to the roof. They put in the structural, they flash in the post for the dunnage frame to support the panels, et cetera. And then the vendor you work with will come and do the installation after.
Yeah, and just a footnote, if the detention basin is being placed where I think it will, why wouldn't we want to cap that to some extent with an array as well? I have a feeling it will shield anyone from accessing the landfill.
Yeah, if it's unusable land, yeah.
If it's down in that area.
That and you can discuss all of that with the PPA
Okay.
group, how extensive you want it to be. What Kate was describing is we're going to do like the roof plan showing this is the right solar orientation where things aren't blocking those panels. And then if you wanted to do some additional ones on canopies or some other places like you're describing, Mark, they could help you work through that. We would work with them though, if like a canopy is a good example, where the structure for that needs to obviously meet the ground, and we want to make sure that there aren't any things underground that are getting in the way. So the sooner you know that, the more helpful it is to us for planning that so that we don't have any conflicts in the future. So
yeah, the only
a good
reason I'm
point.
thinking of that, Keith, is that we shouldn't be contained by the usage of this building. If we've got the ability to do a couple of arrays down here because the site is perfect for it, then it's going to offset utility costs in the other schools.
Absolutely. Yep.
Okay. Other business?
I just wanted to summarize and be clear. So this committee is going to report back to the building committee on the 21st that we're proceeding with the 3 options for the life cycle cost analysis. And I think it would be good to verify that we're not planning this building to be either a emergency shelter nor a resiliency hub, just so everybody's on board with those 2 items.
Yeah, and I think based on that, Larry, and I would agree with what you just said as summary. Roger, maybe you or I have just a conversation with Jason to make sure that that's absolute, because I'm not necessarily in all the meetings to understand that. It's my understanding that it would not be, but I would like to confirm that.
I agree, Keith. We can do that.
Forward, yeah.
Yeah, that seems fine. It would be great after the 21st, and one way or the other, but our direction is clear in terms of saying no, it isn't.
Yep.
Unless people are saying otherwise.
Understood.
That's a good summary, Larry. Thank you.
Okay. Yep.
All right.
Thanks.
So before we adjourn, I'd like to thank everyone for putting up with the chaos of getting this meeting scheduled, and then the subsequent chaos of getting this meeting started. And Keith, thank you for your help, okay, and jumping in on some of the technical aspects. So with that, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Moved by Mark. Is there a second?
Second.
There's no public present?
There is no, well, I don't think, there isn't.
Negative. Yeah, no public are present.
And we also don't have public comment scheduled on this agenda anyway, I don't think. So been moved and seconded, roll call vote that we adjourn. Mark,
Aye.
Chris,
Aye.
I vote aye. We are adjourned at 12:10 PM. I think this is exactly 1 hour after we started too. So good job, everybody. Okay.
Perfect, Norman.
Thank you,
Uh,
Kate, Katie, Larry, good seeing you.
Thank you.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
everybody.
all right.
Bye.
Have a good day, folks.
Too.
Bye.
Two.
Thank
Bye.
you.